And for more analysis, we're joined by Nick Marro, lead analyst of global trade at the Economist Intelligence Unit. Nick, let's start with the basics. So, on what grounds did the U.S. court find President Trump's use of the IEEPA to impose global tariffs unlawful today?
Sure. Well, essentially, it was an interpretation that said the president has exceeded his authority under IEEPA, which is significant given that IEEPA is very much the bedrock of the reciprocal tariffs that were slated to come back in early July, in early August for China. And so what that means is that this is a significant stumbling block for the president's tariff agenda. It means that he is going to have to pursue other legal means to find ways to put duties on major trade partners. But the thing I want to emphasize is that, this is just one part of the story which continues to twist and wind. It doesn't mean the story is over. There's still a lot that could happen by way of other U.S. trade laws. And I think we still need to steel ourselves for a lot of volatility that could be coming our way.
As you mentioned, volatility, many things are up in the air, and I guess eyes are on what immediate impact we may see, especially at U.S. ports following today's ruling. Does it mean that tariffs globally will be retracted?
In theory, it means that at least the tariffs that were justified based on IEEPA will have to stop being collected at U.S. ports. And so that means that some of the front-loading trends, that boom in industrial production and exports that we've seen across Asia, there's a risk that this could start to peter out as people start to get a little less anxious about the tariff outlook. Now, I think at the same time, the fact that your U.S. tariffs have been so stop-start since Donald Trump came into office in January means that exporters and importers are going to remain cautious. I think there's still going to be a very strong incentive to continue getting goods out of Asia into the U.S. As soon as possible to, especially if the U.S. does successfully, or the U.S. administration does successfully get a stay on this ruling by the International Court of International Trade. But I think, in the near term, this is broadly positive for the global trade environment. It reduces and releases a lot of the near-term anxieties around tariff snapback, even if, again, we don't think this story is going to be over.
And speaking of anxieties, many countries are concerned that this may affect bilateral talks that have been slated or been scheduled with the Trump administration. So how would today's ruling actually affect these talks?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's something we're trying to unpack ourselves. I mean, absent the threat of pretty significant tariff escalation, there isn't really going to be much urgency for other trade partners to offer concessions to the U.S. An example of this might be India, who has pledged quite a radical cut in its tariff rates, for example, as a way to come to a deal. Right now, if these tariff threats are no longer legal in the U.S., then that urgency in coming to the negotiating table and hammering out an agreement, that urgency doesn't really exist. But there are exceptions for this. You look at markets like Taiwan and South Korea, for example, who are big exporters of electronics, automotives for South Korea. We have existing tariffs in effect on imported autos. Those tariffs have not been removed by this ruling. We have threatened tariffs on electronics and chips, which are looming over the second quarter. Those have also not been derailed by this ruling. And so as a result, for some markets, there's still going to be an impetus to continue talking because tariff anxieties are still looming large.
Nick, I want to follow up on that question. Does that mean that countries should be changing up their strategies right now?
Well, I think it depends. How China is going to approach this is going to, differ very significantly from how Malaysia approaches this or how Japan approaches this. I think the main thing to watch right now is what is going to happen the next couple of days, couple of weeks regarding whether the Trump administration, again, will be able to stay this ruling, whether it will be allowed to continue to collect tariff duties as the appeals process continues. But beyond that, I think we need to remember that the U.S.'s trade grievances with markets like China, but also Vietnam, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, they go beyond tariffs. They go into structural imbalances. They go into grievances around the currency. Economic frictions are often used in tandem with U.S. anxieties around, say, security topics or immigration topics. And so, this idea that trade is going to be weaponized, I think, is something that we can continue to assume will persist. The story isn't going away anytime soon. And even if we are seeing a little bit of reprieve, some breathing room for the tariff story, it doesn't necessarily mean that the story around currency or export controls or investments or anything else that would serve to make Donald Trump very angry about imbalances in the U.S. trade relationship, it doesn't mean that any of those factors are going to go away anytime soon.
Exactly. And global markets have definitely shaken each time something new came out from the Trump administration ever since his return in January. And given that the market is quite volatile, how do you believe today's ruling could affect stocks?
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, we're already seeing quite a strong positive market reaction in response to all of this. I think one of the things that investors in the US might be looking at is over the past couple of days and weeks, there's been a big kind of conversation around the investability of the US, kind of whether the US is a safe haven or a safe place to do business, both in terms of just parking your assets or getting involved in equity markets. I think a lot of the pessimism that had been characterizing this discussion is now going to see a little bit of a reassessment. But again, the focus right now is needing to separate the cyclical from the structural. Yes, the tariff announcements kind of point to this ongoing volatility and kind of the near term around policy direction. But in terms of the structural issues guiding, say, the U.S. economy, in terms of government spending, the deterioration in U.S.-China relations, these are going to be things that continue to keep investors cautious. And so even if we see a pretty positive market reaction today, it's not inconceivable that investors could become pretty bearish again in the near term.
And Trump administration has filed an appeal. We'll have to see what happens in the coming days. But thank you so much for your insight. That was Nick Marro, lead analyst of global trade at the EIU.